And welcome to episode 12 of the Deep Analysis podcast, or if you're following the numbering in another way, it's series 2, episode 2 for 2024. I'm speaking from the UK, and in our Philadelphia office, we have Alan. Hi, Alan.
Hi there.
Now, those of you who are new to the podcast won't know this, but people who've been here before will. Part of the format of the podcast is telling you the format of the podcast. And here's the format of the podcast. 3 topics, 30 minutes, roughly about 10 minutes a topic, although sometimes those timings go a little bit awry if we get overexcited with what we're talking about. And of course, everything's exciting because we're excited by all the topics that we choose to talk about on the podcast. Obviously, we try to avoid the boring stuff. So first up, first topic, don't trust in magic. Why would anybody be trusting in magic? Well, let's try and explain why that is. If you have the misfortune to follow me on social media, LinkedIn, etc., you'll know that I've been updating the work intelligence market forecast for 2024. More about that, I think, in April's podcast, by the time we get to talk about that. That's how we're wishing the year away already. But anyway, back to February. I've been updating the work intelligence market forecast, which is done and on the way through editing. But there have been various sort of topics that have cropped up in the intervening period. Some about while I've been doing the research. Some of those just popped up on through reportage, news, meetings we've been to, conversations we've had, customers we've spoken to along the way, which made me think, actually, that's kind of relevant to what we're talking about. And the first one was this. It may have escaped you that lots of organizations are trying to devise what their Gen AI strategy might be. And you're thinking, well, that's true. What's that got to do with work intelligence? Well, of course, work intelligence, one of the things that's fundamentally the underpinnings of it is AI, but specifically around Gen AI, I'm talking about the strategies that are coming along. And one of the things I wrote about was some of the anecdotes I was hearing from organizations was that, and this shouldn't come as a surprise to people who've been around technology implementations for a while, some organizations believe by merely introducing a technology to an organization, that it will just find a place where it will deliver value. It's a bit like in your office, let's say, for argument's sake, you decide to bring a box of hammers in and put them on the table. And what are the hammers for? I don't know. The employees will work out where the hammers are useful, whether some things will be good or some things will be bad, that they will just find a place. It kind of sounds ludicrous, but hammers are cheap. Gen AI is hundreds of dollars per user per year if you're taking one of the solutions from Microsoft or Google or Salesforce or the sort of the big hyperscale companies. So we're talking about fairly large investments. So purely using the magic or faith that technology will somehow burrow like a parasitic worm into your workforce. I don't know where that came from, but that it will find a place for it seems to be not an uncommon way to how organizations are doing it. In fact, you could say that they're so desperate to make sure they have a strategy. The strategy is that the strategy will be found by the AI itself. That seems to me to be a slightly strange way of going about it. Alan, I don't think that I'm speaking out of turn here.
No, you're not. Sort of thinking to myself, sorry for the extremely obscure reference, but last week we were at a jazz club listening to the Ethnic Heritage Ensemble.
As you are, as you do.
As you do. Kahil El-Zabah, coolest man on the planet, said, sort of shouted out, nature is bigger than science, and magic is real. I think, though, he would actually agree with us here. Mm-hmm. In the sense that, right, I think we lose sight with these tools. They shine. We talk about shiny new things, right? And we've been talking about shiny new things in tech for years. Mm-hmm. The thing is with shiny new things is they blind you. What's actually important? What matters? What's the strategy? What are we trying to achieve here? Are we trying to survive? Are we trying to get through the next quarter? Are we trying to build a cohesive and lovely place to work? I don't know. But the point is, AI ain't going to do any of that for you. It's just a tool. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a powerful tool.
Or useful. I mean, I think that's quite important to interject with it. There are things which are useful, and I think a lot of the things I call one out in the blog, and it's actually on the screen for people who are watching this version of the podcast. But The one that comes up a lot right now is summarization. The ability, and it's a real ability for Gen AI tools to take a chunk of content and then summarize it and give you back the most important things. It's a feature. It's an exciting and useful feature. It's not new. It's not unique to Gen AI, but for a lot of organizations, it's the first time they've heard about it. Summarization is not a use case. Summarization on its own is not a point of value. It's a feature which you could embed into. This is when it maybe gets a bit back into work intelligence again. It's maybe this is why we're talking about it. When it gets back into an understood existing process, where we know where the points of value are, we know where the time elapse is within that, where summarization may or may not be useful, right?
100%. So, I mean, I write a lot of articles, and sometimes I go over the word count. I haven't tried this, but there would be a summarization use count, right? Okay, I've got this to 1,200 words. Can ChatGPT, can you please bring this down to 800 words? And there's a good chance it'll do a really good job, and it'll do it a lot quicker than me. Would I pay $1 for it? No. But in a complex business process where you've maybe got a 400 word contract or operating procedure or whatever, some lengthy document, I mean, maybe everybody that needs that document doesn't need to read every page of it. Maybe there's a use case there where a summary is quite sufficient, and if that can be automatically generated. But those are the kind of things people have got to think through.
Absolutely. And as I say in the piece here, if it's a benefit, how often is it a benefit? Is it something that happens once a day, once a week, or once a year? Is it happen for 1 employee, 10 employees, or 1,000 employees? Without understanding how common a task that is, you can't get towards that point of actually demonstrating that there's some value to your organization.
And this comes back to something we've been hammering on about for a very, very long time, and we will continue to. You cannot ever underestimate the time, effort, and value of business analysis. If you don't do good business analysis, you are not going to have good outcomes. And yet people desperately try and cut the corners.
Yeah.
And this is a perfect example. I don't doubt there are thousands, tens of thousands of great use cases, but it's going to take work to figure out what they are.
Yeah.
Before you start doing this.
Yeah, and of course, as those people who've read a little bit of the work intelligence stuff that we've been putting out the last couple of years will know one of the sort of central tenets of this is you need to be able to understand processes inside your organization. The processes inside your organization are indicative of how healthy your organization is, not just healthy for shareholders, but healthy for workers, healthy for partners, and healthy for customers, right? They're all parts of those processes. If you don't understand how they're working, it's very difficult to understand how their health. How do you plug in a particularly important, but also potentially extraneous feature like summarization when you don't know when a task called summarization might occur inside your organization, how frequently, and to the realization point of what value?
Yeah, and again, we're not trying to trash Gen AI or anything.
Not at all.
Genuinely not. If I've been advocates, for those who are watching the video, there's a bunch of yellow books there. I've written a book on AI. We're not against AI.
But that's not all the books. Some of them have sold, not just the ones.
Some of them have. Yeah, these are just and no, that's the thing, and honestly, it's really frustrating that year after year you stand on stage or whatever and say to people, you've got to do the business analysis before you implement technology.
But of course, there is.
It's really frustrating.
There is good news. Good news, everybody. If you're new to this and you think, but Matt, Alan, I don't disagree with you, but doing that's really hard. Surely someone shouldn't, before they come up with the AI, should invent a tool that can do the business analysis for us. And the good news is, yes, they have.
Not enough people are using them. Task and process mining.
Not enough people know about them.
Not enough about. Yeah, and again, they don't completely replace the human aspect, far from it. But I mean, having done this myself, I mean, you're talking about reducing the business analysis for a big project from a year or 6 months down to a month or two. I mean, it's a dramatic improvement. These tools can literally do, it's not an exaggeration. These tools can literally do in a day or a week what would have taken 3 to 6 months.
Absolutely. And again, the use of process mining, which is perhaps maybe more mature, task mining that's maybe less so, still requires skills to operate and interpret the results. However, it's the compression of the collation of the data.
The gathering of the data is accelerated to a mind-blowing degree. And I mean, whether you're talking about people like, well, there's loads of them out there, but I mean, Salonis and Apremore, and I mean, you know more than I, but I mean, we've got a long list in our research, right? But there's plenty of them out there, is my point.
And if you are, let's say, Microsoft, who actually made a pretty big investment in building this out, although they've been building it out for their Power Automate platform predominantly. That's a good example, actually, of how the automation platforms who've been building out some of this to create a pipeline for RPA. Yeah, that entire use case, funnily enough, is actually of completely, complete use here, because you're understanding when something's a good case for automation, what you're doing is identifying the tasks that happen within the process, and if those tasks happen to also line up with the features of a Gen AI product, you're like, aha, this is where we can plug these into a process, because we have the data that tells us what the elapsed time or the value point is within that greater process.
I think that's the point we're trying to stress, is that whether you're talking about information management, good old document records management, whether you're talking about automation, BPM, BPA, RPA, IPA, oh my goodness, the list of acronyms goes on. It doesn't really matter. They're all staying. They ain't going anywhere. AI comes along and they augment each other. They help each other, but people still seem to think in the magic that something is going to come along, wave a magic wand, and replace all of this. It's not.
So taking us from AI and magic into AI and the exciting world of business forms.
Yeah.
I think it'd be useful. I mean, I'll bring up for people watching this, the sort of headline from the blog post you wrote at the beginning of this month. But it'd be useful because you're talking about one organization that people haven't heard of joining another organization that maybe some people have heard of, but not everybody. So maybe it's useful to, well, there you go. Maybe it's a good opportunity for people who are new to AIM, for argument's sake, just to give within your explanation about this a little bit about AIM and why they're important.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I sit on the board of AIM, but AIM is basically the industry association that represents information management, or intelligent information management, as they like to call it. Plug, I am going to be speaking at the AIM event in San Antonio this spring. But back to business forms, there was another industry organization called BFMA, Business Forms Management Association. I say there was because it's now part of AIM. So that's what this was all about. But what's been interesting here is business forms. Yeah, it's not exciting and nobody's very interested in it and nobody seems to know much about it. But I remember saying this many years ago, not realizing probably what I was saying at the time. What is a business application? It's a form, maybe some automation, and a repository, a database. I mean, that's sort of what they all are, really, right? But people forget about the forms part. Well, here's the thing. When we think of forms, we think of a paper form. I'm sure if I dug around my desk, I could find some. Plenty of them around, right? And we still get them in the post every day. Well, yes, true. But the reality is, when you go online to apply for a credit card or book travel or whatever you do, what are you doing? You're interfacing with a form.
You're doing structured data entry is what you're doing, Alan.
You're doing structured data entry. And here's the thing. Forms are not simple. They're designed to look simple and they're designed to make filling them in simple, hopefully. Not all government forms, I can attest, are simple. But that, I mean, that's the general thing. But that's the point. People just walk away. Like it's all about some kind of design. Well, not these days. These days, a lot of forms are really mini business applications, right? They're doing an enormous amount of processing, and it comes back to what we were talking about with that automation before. If all a form does is just collect some data and chucks it into a workflow, well, okay, well, and that's what has happened for donkey's years. But now we're getting to that point, particularly with AI, that no, we want good quality data, right? Yeah. So if somebody's applying for, I don't know, I'm making this up, right? But if somebody's applying for a credit card and they've got an income of $5,000 a year, you know what? Let's just tell them you're not getting a credit card. Because you're not getting a credit card. There is no point triggering some ridiculous workflow, which is costly, time-consuming, to come to the obvious conclusion. You can do a lot of pre-processing. So forms is anyway, we won't go into too much further, but forms just in general are incredibly important and overlooked. And it's an area every enterprise should really look into. I mentioned in this that there was insurance. I was in a presentation in Vienna and an insurance company, and I'll be honest, I was sat there because they followed my keynote. And really choose.
So you were there to be polite.
Well, I couldn't really walk out. And about 50 minutes in, I thought, oh, this is a complex project. What's all this about? Oh my God, he's talking about building forms. And they're really complex. And then he starts talking about how many thousands of them their organizations have. And you know, it's just that area we forget time and time again. And it gets
over. Go back to what we were saying earlier on about processes and processes, right. that bit reflecting, you know, the health of an organization, and the healthier they are, the better they are not just for employees, but also customers, right? And then you think about how a form is often the one and only interface that someone might have to an organization. For argument's sake, applying for home insurance or car insurance or a loan, the first interface you might have with an organization is that. So making it as simple as possible to complete is not only good for just, you know, general flow of process, but also this is an important part of customer acquisition in that case, right?
Well, that's the thing. When you start really thinking about it, it's incredibly important because, you know, again, and you said it, I said it, it's the trigger, it's the start. Well, actually, it's often also the end point as well. It forms traverse the whole thing. But again, coming back to the magic of AI, you know, we cannot say this enough times. If the data is not accurate, the outcomes, the output's not going to be accurate. It's as simple as that. So forms are the first filter to ensure accurate data. Like even basic things like if I write in my home address and I type in an incorrect number on my zip code, it should never get past the form, right? That's basic stuff. You should trigger it and say that zip code doesn't. But even though we've been able to filter that kind of thing out of form for 20 plus years, still to this day, that's not happening.
The number of forms, Alan, I hit each year that when I put in my postcode or my phone number, it tells me there should be a space in them. I'm thinking, trim functions have been around as long as programming have. Implement a trim function, for God's sake.
So what we're making here anyway is that is this an overlooked field? My heavens, yes, right? This is about as niche as you get. And yet, you know, we can put all our focus onto the shiny new things, or we can actually make things work.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course,
working is a good place to start.
And what falls off the back of this is often the same kind of processing overhead. For those of you who follow Dan's IDP thread of stuff for deep analysis, he will be on the next podcast, the March podcast, talking about the IDP market analysis. So if you're excited by hearing Dan talk about that, and Dan can talk about that for the whole half an hour if I let him, he'll be on for that. More probably. So that's something to be excited and look forward to for next time. On to our third topic, and I'm going to keep a close eye on the stopwatch because I know this is a subject that Alan and I like to talk about for a long time. So let's kind of workers and trust is something we'd like to talk about, but let's just give the context again. Something I wrote about at the beginning of this year. If you're in the UK, you'll know this story already, or some of this story already. If you're outside the UK, you probably don't know it, but I'll give you a quick 30 seconds. If you're in the UK, you notice either you're looking on the screen, or if you don't, the blog post uses a photograph that I took I was touring around the Postal Museum in London, which is a brilliant museum, contains the history of the postal system in the UK, and you get to ride on the mail rail tiny underground trains that used to run between posting sorting locations in London. It's brilliant. Anyway, that's not what I want to talk about. I just want to talk about mail rail for a moment. There's kind of an ongoing, it's been blowing up over sort of 20 years, a kind of national scandal involving a software project. Basically, a large software project was implemented at post offices in the UK, the result of which is many of the people who worked or operated those post offices were accused of stealing. They said, it wasn't us, it's the software. They were told, don't be stupid, software's perfect, and then got sent to jail. 20 years later, I found out it was the software, and they're gradually, those of you who survived the process of being jailed are now gradually being exonerated from it. And this was over Christmas, a drama based on this process, this entire legal process, starring several British national treasures, was broadcast. And this brought political weight to actually finally fix this situation that, if you've been reading Computer Weekly in the UK, you've known about since 2008, I think, is when they started first covering this.
Yeah, but it's more than that, isn't it? It comes back to what we were saying, is that there's way too much trust placed in technology. Mm-hmm. You, the people who run the technology, are responsible for it, whether it's the most advanced form of AI or it's an aging COBOL system. It doesn't matter. It's yours. You own it, and it makes mistakes. Why does it make mistakes? Because you made mistakes, right? Why does AI make mistakes? Because you gave it bad data, or you asked it the wrong questions, or you fed it full of bias and you didn't know. Well, you're the one who fed it.
Yeah.
So
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And I think back to our when we first started to put together work intelligence, one of those things was it is important within work intelligence to understand what the workforce brings to the discovery of process, the analysis of process, the validation of process, and to give you continued operational feedback. Now, what's interesting about this one isn't just that technology fails. We know technology fails when it's implemented poorly. That's kind of a given. And in this case, it did a sort of terrible outcome for people's lives. It's the fact that the position from the employer, in this case, the post office, their starting point was workers weren't to be trusted. If something wrong, it must have been the workers that fiddled it. And I saw a tweet. It was from, I got it on screen for people who are listening to him, but I'll read it out for people who aren't. It was from Alan Finlayson, who's a professor of political and social theory at the University of East Anglia, UEA, in the UK. And he said on the 12th of January, when he was watching it, that my takeaway from the post office scandal is the breadth of a destructive management culture built on the conviction that workers are intrinsically a problem, never a solution, assumed to be ignorant and on the make. He also goes on to say, also, management can't buy software and get stiffed every time. I don't think anybody listening to that is disagreeing with that. But to go back to that, with the conviction that workers are intrinsically a problem, never a solution, assumed to be ignorant and on the make. Now, I think we'll recognize some of those kind of beliefs in the broad discussion around home working. If you let people work from home, all they'll do is sleep or play video games or exercise or everything other than work. As soon as someone isn't being watched 24/7 through a camera, they will do things that they're not supposed to do. And I think that's something that resonated with me or resonated with us, I think, is that we realize that for work intelligence and the broader kind of idea of automation, they're not necessarily, or shouldn't be there on a premise to replace people. That shouldn't be the starting point. You don't go, Why are we doing automation? Well, we're doing automation to replace people. Why are we replacing people? Because people are expensive. right? Automation is there to do other things. And it's one of the reasons, and I'll stop talking in a second, I promise. It's one of the reasons why the term hyper automation, which has become very popular, became very popular in the last half a decade, kind of jars a little bit when we start to compare that to the concept of work intelligence. Alan.
Well, it more than jars, it sticks in my throat. Because, you know, there are people out there who say, you know, you should basically automate everything in sight. Why? Well, to your point, because it's cheaper than a human doing it and it'll do it faster and quicker. Well, there we go. That's 3 boxes checked. Will it do the job better? That's the question, right? Will it actually do the job better? And often it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I don't know what the actual figure is, but was it the, who did it? Standish Group, I think. They did a thing years about, you know, IT project. I mean, it's like something like 70% plus of IT projects fail or fall short of expectations. Nobody who works in the IT industry disputes that figure, right? You've got a horrible record here. And when you start out with the sort of standpoint of, I'll automate it because people are expensive and I can do it cheaper, you are almost certainly on a route, a bad place. It almost never works out. And if I can turn the argument or the discussion a little bit onto the trust thing and pick up Slack discussion we had, you know, it's not the job of analysts to hype the industry, right? Because something's got something shiny and new, they need to sell it. It's not our job to go out there and sell it on their behalf. It's our job to point out the flaws in it as well as the benefits of it. And there's too much of that. There's just too much of the hype. And it, you know, I'm a realist. That'll probably never change. But my point is, we're complicit in it too, right? This goes right back, probably before actually, but in my lifetime at least, it goes back to ERP systems, right? They get the job better and better. And you're going to spend 25, 100, 200 in some cases, $1 million on change management and business process re-engineering, everything. Here's the twist. The principles weren't wrong, but the motivation was wrong. Yeah. It overstretched and you ended up spending a lot more money than you would have done if you just kept the people. Now, we're not saying you shouldn't automate. We're not saying
absolutely not.
Change. We're not saying you shouldn't move with the times and improve. Not at all. But when you think, going back to point A, that something magical is going to come along and change everything for you, you're dreaming.
Yeah,
it's not like that. And the workers, if you've ever done business analysis work, and I have, they have insights that no machine has. They have insights that no task or process mining. By the way, you should definitely use process and task mining. They're fantastic. But they have insights. They know why it works this way. They know why there's a workaround. They can tell you why, you know.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you automate their jobs. Because
interestingly, we did
in the first place.
Last year we built a model that we're now referring to as the economic spectrum report model, and we built that internally here to kind of give an alternative way of expressing return on investment. And the pilot study we did, that when we talked to the customers within the pilot study using for the first ESR, what they were pulling up from their experiences of automation, in this case with RPA, was benefits around making predictable work practices so people didn't have to work late and weren't able to get there for the family or having to work weekends. That created, when we started to look at the analysis, enormous financial benefit, but the starting point wasn't the financial benefit, it was improving the quality of the process to the benefit of the workforce. So if your starting point is we want to do automation, you miss that. If your starting point is we want to make the process healthier for the people who are involved in running the process or those affected by the process, you will be amazed what benefits fall out actually that give you the financial return that maybe will help you fund the project.
Yeah, and I know we're slightly running over, but if I can turn it back to the business forms, there's a case in point, right? There is a case in point. If we, you and I, Matt, we worked for a long time in the sort of digital marketing CMS world, right? WCM, as we originally called it, right? And so much money, so much effort was put into the design of websites, and nothing was put into the back end.
Yeah.
Right. So people would get online and they'd say, "Oh, this is cool." Right. Click. Where's the answer? But there wasn't.
Well,
one.
indeed. I mean, the first e-commerce platforms that I worked on in the 90s had a front end, and then what happened was what happened at the end of it was a fax got printed off in a shop, and then someone went around and made up an order. Now, that actually was an entirely legitimate way of doing it. That was the way the process worked.
Still widely done in the healthcare sector here in the US.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I think this is an area, and we will look. I say that, you know, we will come back to. We're going to come back to it when the work intelligence report comes out, and there's going to be more kind of lessons that are going to come up from that. So when we come back to talk about that, the full report in some more detail in the April podcast, it'll probably be you and me again then, Alan. It's me and Dan next month, but you and me in April.
Brush up not on avant-garde jazz for that one, but probably Guy Debord and the Society for Spectacle Situationism, and try and bring a different perspective.
Excellent.
Not.
If you can do some graphics in advance that explains that on for people who are reviewing, that's great. There will of course be full show notes attached to this. You may actually already be able to scroll down the page and seeing this, depending how you're reading or listening to this right now. But that's it for this time. Next time, 3 more topics and 30 minutes to discuss them. And thanks for joining again, Alan.
Thank you.
And thank you for downloading or viewing or listening to this podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.